of all, though, just to clarify, you were there in America from 2002 to 2012. You had George W. Bush and Obama as presidents. You were there with, what, Obama's second term, Jack?
Obama and then
the
to Trump.
Election, oh, my goodness. Oh, my goodness. Well, first of all, what do you make of the campaigns so far? I mean, obviously they look really different in COVID times. What are you thinking about how this campaign's shaping up?
My sense is that the swing states are starting to come into play. And, you know, I just saw an article in The Guardian, which is, of course, the Pravda of political analysis, which said essentially that that Joe Biden is starting to struggle, and he's facing the same uphill battle in those swing states that Hillary Clinton faced. And so the polls, there are national polls, there are state-by-state polls. Pay attention to those swing states, you'll get an idea of what's happening.
Obviously, there's a very unusual election because of COVID-19. And usually when a president is looking for a second term, especially a president who is as masterful when it comes to the media as Donald Trump, it would be very difficult for the other candidate to try and get much media time. But it's been interesting to look at Joe Biden's campaign over the last few months, because their strategy has actually been to keep Joe out of the news as much as possible. He has literally been living in his house in Delaware, staying out of the news and letting Donald Trump haphazardly handle the COVID-19 crisis in America, effectively digging himself in his own hole or his own grave. But it's interesting because, you know, as the race draws closer, the election draws closer, and these two are actually forced to face off. I think particularly when the debates begin, that's an environment that's really going to suit Donald Trump. So you know,
I think Joe Biden needs to be drinking a spirulina, taking his pep pills, getting his herbal supplements, because he will be, in terms of face-to-face, I would not like to go up against Donald Trump.
Wow.
Were I Joe Biden, just because Joe Biden has... He's a great guy. I mean, I think we both agree Americans love him. But Donald Trump, he loves to fight. That's his default mode. He can't unite, he can only divide, and that's perfect in a debate.
And of course, a lot of people have been saying, look, it's Joe Biden's to lose, because the polls were certainly suggesting that. But as you say, things are starting to get a lot closer. But how much reliance can we put on polls, Jack? I mean, you saw what happened last time.
I mean, you've got to keep a couple of things in mind. The first is that the nature of the US general election isn't decided by a popular vote. And so when we think of the polls in New Zealand, we just think of like everyone having a vote, but that's not how it works in the US. You've got to remember that the structure of the Electoral College means that it's not just, you know, the overall number, it's which states you actually win that will decide the presidency. So, for example, Hillary Clinton actually won more votes than Donald Trump in 2016, but didn't win the election. That being said, I think there's every reason to think that Joe Biden has had a lead over Donald Trump, but like Tim said, it comes down to these all-important swing states. So in 2016, for example, Hillary Clinton lost Michigan, Pennsylvania and Wisconsin by 77,000 votes in total. Now, that's a population smaller than the size of Palmerston North that decided the last election. So those are the sorts of states that they're going to be focusing on.
They will be, but and before we go, oh, this is unfair, this is the way the American system is configured, because when the Founding Fathers created America, so to speak, they hated unified power. They hated power to be constant because they'd come from a monarchy. So they wanted to make it so that a small state, a small rural state, would have as much power as those massive, the parentheses, if you like, Los Angeles, New York. So it's kind of...
It can be confusing.
It's what equality looks like.
Well, is it? I mean, it can be confusing, but the way to think of it is like a state like California, which has, you know, 40 or 50 million people. If you win that state by 2 votes, that's as significant in the general election as if you win it by 35 million votes.
And it's insane, isn't it? Because just how closely we watch it. Now, I'm a bit of a news geek, so of course I think this is fascinating. But why should people in New Zealand care what's happening in the US? I mean, does it actually have... Does this election, does what happens have any bearing on us here at home?
I think there are 2 reasons why we should care. Number one, the US is our 3rd largest trading partner. 10% of our exports go to the US, so there's an economic argument. Our biggest trading partner is China. And what you're seeing with China and the US is there is an existential struggle between these 2 countries because they're both the two dominant superpowers. So if you care about what New Zealand will look like in 10, 15, 20 years' time, you'll be interested in the outcome of the US election because of their policies in regards of China.
I also think that when it comes to global leadership, these two candidates have very different visions for America's role. So you think about the US under Obama or under George W. Bush, for example. You know, the US was looking to lead the UN, looking to lead the WHO, all of these big international institutions in which New Zealand probably actually has more influence than our small population would allow for. Donald Trump doesn't see the US as having a big role in those institutions, and you only need to look at the nature of the global COVID-19 response and the way that all these different countries have come up with different ways of handling it to actually look at, you know, America stepping back from those kind of global institutions, and you get a real sense of what happens when we don't have a country taking the lead as it has in the last 50 or 60 years in those roles.
And it certainly does frustrate a lot of other countries, doesn't it, when they have change their positioning, and certainly in those major bodies.
America, but if you look historically with America, it oscillates between engagement with the world and isolationism. I mean, the reason that America joined the Second World War was only because of an attack on US soil.
Yeah,
we can debate all of that
Yeah,
stuff, but
yeah,
there are these twin sort of poles in American life and the American view of the world. Number one, we're super interested. Mostly, though, we're interested in us. We're America. We're still the big show. It's us, us, us.
But also, this election seems to be a bit of a spectacle, doesn't it? Because it's got a personality in it that attracts a lot of headlines.
It's American politics. It's the biggest show in town, right?
I mean, there's just so much. Like, you just got to remember the amount of money at stake and the amount of, like, the power that is at stake, and you know, there are all sorts of
the show.
I mean, the show is amazing, obviously.
Honestly,
go on.
no, but Americans, New Zealanders, it's like you ask a New Zealander who you vote for, and it'll be, oh well, and they sort of start to look around. But an American will tell you who they vote for, why they voted for them, and why you should vote for them.
And why you're wrong.
And why you're wrong.
Yeah. I always think too, just like the, you know, like in US politics, there was a Supreme Court decision. You know, about 6 or 8 years ago, that essentially means that anyone or any corporation can put as much money as they want into a campaign. And so it's just wild. Like there are literally people putting in hundreds of millions of dollars into the candidates' campaigns, which means like the ads you see on TV and all that sort of thing are just bananas compared to anything you would ever see in New Zealand. Yeah, it's delicious.
It must be a surreal experience to live through. Very last question, because we've been told to wrap. So yes, no answer. Do you think this is, as Donald Trump says, the most important election in US history?
Don't take anything to the bank that Donald Trump says, but it is a very important election in US history. Let's let history decide that. Thanks, Don.
I'd say, look, certainly in the last 50 years.